Hey, my media literate hotties. Welcome to an episode of Chronicled. I'm Kelsey Russell. You guys might know me from TikTok as the media literate hottie, the print princess. But here at Chronicled on this podcast, we are going to figure out what the hell journalism actually is. So today we're going to be talking about the publication Rolling Stone. I actually really like the story of how Rolling Stone started because it was an absolute flop. And I think it's good for people who want to start their own media companies who read media to understand that things that might be a legacy institution now or household names didn't always start that way. So let's go back to the year. It's 1967. There is this guy named Jan. Let me make sure I'm saying his name correctly because Winner, Jan Winner. Thank you. Um, Jan Wenner, he is a college dropout and also an activist. And then there's another guy named Ralph Gleason, music critic and an editor. And it's a lot going on in the 1960s in the United States of America, if you are not aware. A lot of social turmoil, political turmoil, and music was actually doing a decent job unifying the country. And these two people said, let's talk about the way that music is changing politics, social critique. And when I was doing my research, obviously, Papa was a Rolling Stone. I'm not gonna sing it because I don't want y'all to know I'm actually Beyonce. But I didn't realize that a Rolling Stone came from a proverb, and I didn't realize was because a Rolling Stone never gathers moss, so they never have a home. Nothing ever grows on them. Also, so many songs about Rolling Stones from Muddy Water, like a Rolling Stone. So now we know where the name Rolling Stone actually comes from. Now, let's talk about the flop era of Rolling Stone. 40,000 copies are printed and released on November 9th, 1967. 34,000 of those copies go unsold. It absolutely does be like that, but they had the idea to boost sales. We're going to give people a free roach clip with every single subscription. And not much has changed about human society as we love free things. And it did the job. Rolling Stone actually came on the up and up finally. And record companies realized something. They said, wait, if we put the music that we're releasing into Rolling Stone, more people might actually buy these records. So we absolutely see Rolling Stone, the ability to reach a younger audience, cover rock and roll, and also they become known for their tough love of music critiques. So basically, if you want something warm and fluffy about your record, Rolling Stone is not the place to go. And my favorite thing, and we're actually going to talk about this with CT, who's going to come in an interview, is Rolling Stone kind of marks this rise of a new age of journalism. Now, I am not a journalist myself, but I am somebody who loves media literacy. And when I did my research, the rise of gonzo journalism, which basically just said instead of, if you guys don't know how journalism sometimes works, the idea is that an author detaches themselves from what they're writing and fact checks things from third parties. What gonzo journalism said is absolutely not. Like, I matter in this story, right? As an author, I'm seeing things, and it's important that my voice is included in the writing and what I'm reporting. And the reason that I love this is because when we think about real stories that come out in journalism, especially when we're talking about type topics that might hit home, like for example, if we're talking about somebody who is going through active addiction and is coming from an impoverished background, to say it's one thing to go and talk about them and confirm with facts. It's another thing to live in their actual life and put yourself in the shoes of somebody. And as a sociologist, that's how you do your best research is you live among people and you get to understand them, and you're able to use profanity and humor and satire in your work and in your reporting, because not all reporting, not all stories are linear. It's important to actually, I feel like some of my favorite stories are when a journalist actually shares how they felt in the moments, what it was like being there. So I thought it was so interesting that Rolling Stone kind of was this moment where we see a lot more of that reporting happening. Now, Rolling Stone also went through another flop era because you can't just have one flop era, obviously, but it was minor. It wasn't as bad. In the 80s, we see the music shift from rock and roll to punk. And when that happens, the magazine's like, wait, we write about rock and roll, so what are we supposed to do? So a couple things happened. They did these ads that were about perception versus reality, which were really interesting, and they compared items from the 1960s to the 1980s. The ads were actually met with a lot of controversy, but what does a good controversial ad do? It sells. So people did end up buying Rolling Stone more. And when we see the magazine shift into an entertainment magazine more than a music magazine, I found this very interesting because when I was doing my research, like, I don't think as music and entertainment as separate, but then I thought about in the '90s how we see the rise of huge pop stars and entertainment becomes almost this machine that is music, that is the celebrity, that is the culture, that is the fashion, that is the trends. And, Rolling Stone decided to chase those trends and also try to get a younger excuse me, I didn't tape that note down to my cue card, but, you know, we see that Rolling Stone begins to chase those trends. And a lot of old Rolling Stone fans did not like that. They did not like the fact that, why are you covering teeny boppy Britney Spears? I love Britney Spears. I will be happy to see somebody cover Britney Spears. And in the 2000s, we see Rolling Stone kind of regain this footing of real, raw reporting. And they had some really iconic moments in the 2000s and some of the 2010s. Specifically, they're reporting about Hurricane Katrina, the 2009 financial crisis, the Iraq war that ends up winning a bunch of awards. But we also see that they kind of end themselves in some trouble. I remember this in terms of the Boston bombing, and Rolling Stone decided to put the person who bombed the Boston Marathon on the cover of Rolling Stone. People in Boston, especially, were not a fan of that, and that's fair. But I think that that is what's interesting always about learning the history of a publication. Like we say, things are not always linear. Publications do things that the public is not happy with. How they regain their footing is usually the most interesting story, I would say. Now let's also just talk about the ownership of Rolling Stone. We always want to think big about who owns the media that we're consuming. That isn't directly related to who was writing and the stories that we're seeing, but I do think it's important to realize that some magazines, some papers are owned locally. Some are owned by organizations. Rolling Stone is owned by a mass media company that also owns other corporations and other publications like Vanity, Billboard, The Hollywood Reporter. Um, Also, what I find so interesting is the mass media corporation they're owned by is one of the largest stakeholders in Vox Media, and they also have a stake in the Globe and Globe Awards, American Music Awards, Streamy Awards, Billboard Music Awards. So I think it's always interesting from a business standpoint to think about, and just food for thought. Like I say, I don't have the thoughts, maybe I'm just providing the food. Is that how fascinating that, like, a lot of the media we're consuming are very intertwined with the awards that we're watching, the award shows, especially the Streamy Awards. That was a great, I mean, shout out. That was a great thing to acquire. I 100% agree. And then also when we talk about where does, you know, socially, where does a magazine land? Where does a publication land? You know, Rolling Stone has endorsed Democratic candidates. They have criticized Donald Trump. I'm mad at them for that. And they also have criticized George Bush. And I just think it's always important that we know, where does our media land, but also what is your media diet in taking, right? If you're only taking things that are from the left, only from the right, that's kind of a problem. If you're only comfortable in taking one source, it might be time to step outside your comfort zone and read something else. So I'm really, really excited because, as I was saying, Rolling Stone could be owned by whoever, but we're about to talk to the one and only CT Jones, making a huge impact in culture and is actually a writer for Rolling Stone. Super excited for this conversation, hear about CT's journey, and also just about the way that CT is able to, I think, really talk about culture and inclusivity in writing, and why that's important. So excited to have them on here. So let's get to our interview with CT Jones. Cue.